Sometimes the coldest winter isn't measured in degrees, but in the cruelty men choose when they think no one's watching. December 18, 1876. The Sierra Blanca Mountains wore their winter coat thick that year, snow piling deep enough to swallow a man's mistakes along with his tracks. Up in those high places where the pines grew so close together they blocked out the sky, a different kind of cold was taking hold, the kind that freezes the soul long before it touches the skin. Thomas Mackenzie moved through the trees like a shadow with purpose. 6'4" of mountain-hardened muscle, red-brown beard thick enough to trap the ice crystals that formed with each breath. His hands, scarred and calloused from 20 years of living rough, gripped his rifle with the easy confidence of a man who'd learned young that hesitation killed faster than bullets. They called him Bear, not for his size alone, though God knew he had plenty of that. The name came from a fight 3 winters back, when a grizzly had taken exception to Bear sharing her berry patch. The scar that ran down his left cheek, white against weather-beaten skin, told how that argument had ended. The bear hide that now warmed his cabin told the rest. He'd been tracking a bull elk since dawn, following sign through snow that came up past his knees. Good meat. Enough to keep his 5 boys fed through January if he was careful with it. The thought of his sons warmed him more than his fur-lined coat ever could. 5 boys, ranging from 14 down to 6, waiting for him in a cabin 2 days north. 5 boys who depended on him for everything since their mother had died bringing the youngest into this frozen world. Sarah. Even after 2 years, thinking her name brought a familiar ache. She'd made him promise, in those final moments when the light was leaving her eyes and little Wolf's first cries filled their cabin. Teach them to be men who protect the weak, men who stand between the helpless and the wolves, no matter what it costs. He'd sworn it on her cooling hand. And Thomas Mackenzie had never broken a promise to anyone, living or dead. The elk's tracks led him east, toward the abandoned mining country where men had once dug for silver and found only disappointment. Empty cabins dotted these woods like tombstones, monuments to dreams that had died hard in the unforgiving earth. Bear knew every one of them. He'd sheltered in most during his ranging, back when he'd scouted for the army. Back before he'd seen what orders from comfortable offices did to people who'd never wanted anything but to live free on the land their ancestors had walked. Back before he'd stood up in that fort commander's office and said no more, not in my name, not with my help. That decision had cost him. But some prices were worth paying. The wind shifted, carrying something that made Bear stop dead in his tracks. Not the elk. Something else. Something that didn't belong in these winter-locked mountains. The faint, desperate sound of a woman screaming. The cry cut off abruptly, swallowed by distance and snow and the muffling embrace of 10,000 trees. But Bear had heard it. Once you've heard a woman scream in fear, really heard it, that sound stays carved into your memory like names on a gravestone. He stood perfectly still, letting his breathing slow, listening with every sense honed by 2 decades of staying alive in places where the land itself wanted you dead. There. Again. Fainter now, but unmistakable. Coming from the old Henderson cabin, maybe half a mile east through the heavy timber. The elk forgotten, Bear moved. Not running, that would be foolish in snow this deep, but covering ground with the steady, relentless pace of a man who knew how to keep moving when others would have given up. His mind was already working through possibilities. Miners, maybe, sheltering from the storm that had blown through 3 days ago. Could be innocent. Could be a woman hurt, needing help. Could be something darker. The cabin came into view through the trees. Smoke rose from its stone chimney. 3 horses stood hip-shot in what passed for a lean-to, their breath steaming in the bitter air. Bear recognized none of them. The brands weren't local. These animals had come from the southern ranges, down where the big cattle operations ran. He approached from downwind, using the trees for cover, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. 20 feet from the nearest window, he stopped behind a thick pine and listened. Male voices, rough laughter, the clink of whiskey bottles, and underneath it all, a sound that made Bear's jaw clench hard enough to ache. Quiet, desperate weeping, trying not to be heard. He moved to the window, keeping low. Through the dirty glass, the scene inside painted itself clear as a hanging judge's verdict. 3 men around a fire. Big men, dressed in the kind of clothes that said they worked cattle or worse, holsters on their hips, rifles propped against the wall, empty bottles on the floor, and in the corner, as far from the fire as the small room allowed, a woman. She was Apache. Bear knew it from the way her hair fell, black as midnight and thick as winter fur. From the doe-skin dress, torn now and filthy. From the proud set of her shoulders, even with her hands bound behind her back and her feet tied at the ankles. Even from here, even through glass blurred with frost and years of neglect, he could see the bruises on her face, the blood dried at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't old, maybe 30, maybe younger. Hard to tell with what they'd done to her, but her eyes, those he could see clear enough, dark and fierce and absolutely refusing to break. A warrior's eyes, even when the warrior had lost this particular battle. One of the men, thick-necked with a scar across his forehead in the shape of an X, was speaking. Bear couldn't hear the words through the glass, but he could read the intent. The man was asking questions. The woman wasn't answering. The man didn't like that. Bear counted to 3, slow and steady like Sarah had taught him when his temper ran hot. Then he picked up a good-sized rock from the foundation, moved quiet to the back of the cabin, and threw it hard against the rear door. The sound inside stopped immediate. Chairs scraped. Boots hit floor. Voices rose, sharp with the tension of men who'd been doing something they knew was wrong. What was that? Go check it out. Both of you. Could be wolves. 2 men came out the back, rifles ready, breath clouding. They moved away from the door toward where the rock had hit, arguing in low voices about what they'd heard. Bear was already moving to the front. He didn't knock. The door, old and weakened by years of mountain weather, gave way under his shoulder like it was made of paper. The 3rd man, the one with the scarred forehead, had just enough time to turn, to register the massive shape filling the doorway, before Bear's fist caught him square in the jaw. The sound of breaking bone echoed in the small space. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Bear moved across the room in 2 strides, grabbed the woman's bonds, drew the knife from his belt and cut her free. Their eyes met for one brief moment. Hers were wide with shock, but calculating, measuring him, deciding if he was salvation or just a different kind of threat. "You're safe now, ma'am," Bear said, his voice rough from disuse. He spoke slow and clear in case she didn't know much English. He draped his spare blanket over her shoulders without looking directly at her. A small respect, but respect all the same. The back door slammed open. The 2 men rushed in, saw Bear, saw their companion unconscious on the floor, saw the woman freed. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the taller of the 2 went for his gun. Bear was faster. His rifle came up smooth as silk, and the crack of the shot in that confined space was like thunder. The bullet took the man's hat clean off his head and buried itself in the wall behind him. The man froze, hand halfway to his holster, face going white. "Next one won't be a warning," Bear said. His voice was quiet, conversational almost. That made it more frightening than any shout. "Drop the gun belts, all of you, slow." They did. The leather hit the floor with heavy thuds. "Now the one on the floor, wake him up." One of the men kicked his companion, none too gently. The scarred man groaned, consciousness returning unwelcome. When his eyes focused on Bear, fear replaced confusion. "I know you," the man said, lisping through his broken jaw. "You're Mackenzie, the one who testified." "I am. Dalton's going to kill you for this." "He's welcome to try." Bear's rifle never wavered. "Now you boys are going to walk out that door and keep walking. South. Don't stop till you see grass." "It's 20 miles to the nearest ranch," the tall one protested. "Then you better start now. Daylight's burning. We'll freeze. Maybe you'll learn something about how it feels to be helpless. Now move." They moved. Slowly at first, then faster as Bear's rifle tracked them. The scarred one, Jessup was his name, Bear remembered now, turned at the door. "This ain't over, Mackenzie. Dalton wants that squaw. He'll send more men." "Let him." Bear's voice was flat, final. "Every man who comes looking for trouble will find more than he bargained for. You tell him that. Tell him Thomas Mackenzie gives his word." They stumbled out into the snow. Bear watched until they reached their horses, mounted up despite their missing gun belts, and rode south. Only then did he lower his rifle and turn back to the woman. She was standing now, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching him with those fierce dark eyes. She hadn't run, hadn't screamed, just waited, evaluating, smart. "You understand English?" Bear asked. "I understand." Her voice was surprisingly strong. Accent there, but the words clear. "There's water in my pack. Food too. Not much, but it's clean." He set his pack on the table, moved to the fire to build it up. The cabin was cold, would get colder when full dark came. They'd need to stay the night, let her rest before attempting the 2-day trek to his place. Moving now, in her condition, would be asking for trouble. While he worked the fire, she drank from his canteen, slowly, carefully, like someone who knew what it was to be truly thirsty. When she'd had enough, she took the jerky he offered, tore off small pieces with teeth that were white and strong. He gave her space, sat on the far side of the room, back against the wall where he could watch the door and the window both. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak at all unless she wanted to. After maybe 10 minutes, she spoke. "Why you help me? You not know me. Don't need to know you to know what those men were doing was wrong. Many white men not care about wrong, not when it happened to Apache. I'm not many white men." She studied him, head tilted slightly. "No, you not." A pause. "They keep me 3 weeks. Want to know where my people hide for winter. I not tell." "Good." That one word seemed to surprise her. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Good? You protected your people. That takes courage and honor." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You know this word? Honor?" "I do. My wife, before she died, she made me promise to teach our sons about it. Can't teach what you don't understand." "Your wife, she Apache?" "No, white. But she believed honor wasn't about the color of your skin. It was about what you did when nobody was watching." The woman nodded slowly, as if considering this. Then, "You have sons?" "5 of them, 14 down to 6 years old. Got a cabin 2 days north of here. Small place, but it's warm and there's food. You're welcome to come, rest up, heal. No questions asked. No strings attached." "Why? Why you do this?" Bear was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Because my Sarah asked me to teach my boys to be men who protect the weak. Can't teach by telling. Got to teach by doing." The woman looked at him for a long time. Bear could feel the weight of her gaze, the careful measuring. Finally she spoke again. "My name, Njoni. In my language it mean beautiful." "That's a good name." He didn't say she was beautiful. Though even beaten and exhausted as she was, he could see the truth of it. Saying so would have been disrespectful. "I'm Thomas. Most folks call me Bear." "Bear." She tested the name on her tongue. "Because you big like bear?" "Because I fought one once and lived to tell about it." For the first time she smiled. Just a little, but it was there. "Apache say, man who fight bear and win is very strong or very stupid." "Probably both in my case." She laughed at that. A small sound, almost surprised, as if she'd forgotten laughter was something she could still do. The sound did something to the cold emptiness in the cabin, made it feel less like a prison and more like a shelter. They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Comfortable. The fire crackled. Outside, new snow began to fall, thick flakes that would cover the tracks of the 3 men, would make the world clean and white again by morning. Bear watched the flames and thought about the name those men had mentioned. Dalton. Henry Dalton, who owned half the rangeland south of here, who wanted to own the other half, who'd been pushing for years to move the Apache off their traditional lands, to clear the way for cattle and silver mines and all the money that came with them. Dalton, who Bear had testified against 2 years back when the Army had been investigating raids on Apache villages, raids that somebody had made to look like they came from other Apache tribes trying to start wars that would justify removal. Bear had tracked those raiders, had seen through their disguises, had stood up in that hearing and said clear as church bells that they were white men dressed up to look Indian. The Army had quietly shelved that investigation. Orders from Washington, they said. Political concerns. But Dalton had known who'd cost him his tidy little plan, and men like Dalton didn't forget. This Dalton, Najoni said, as if reading his thoughts. He is bad man. Worse than bad, he's smart, and he's got money and friends in the territory government. He want my people's land. It wasn't a question, but Bear answered anyway. The canyon where your people winter. There's silver there, good silver from what I hear. Dalton wants it. Our sacred canyon, where the spirits live. I know. Bear met her eyes. And I'm sorry, for what it's worth. She nodded, accepting this. Then, these men, they come back? Probably, with more friends next time. Then I bring danger to you, to your sons. Danger was already coming, ma'am. Has been since I chose to speak truth instead of keeping my head down. At least this way, I get to choose the ground we fight on. Najoni was quiet for a moment. Then she did something that surprised him. She stood, walked closer to the fire, and began to sing. Soft and low, in a language he didn't understand but found beautiful all the same. The words rose and fell like water over stones, like wind through pine branches, like all the old things that had been here long before men came with their guns and their greed. When she finished, she looked at him. Apache song, for blessing shelter and those who give it. Thank you, Bear said, and meant it. They didn't speak much after that, didn't need to. Understanding ran deeper than words sometimes. She settled near the fire, wrapped in his blanket. He took first watch, sitting by the door with his rifle across his knees. Outside, the snow fell thick and silent, covering the world in white. Inside, in a cabin that had seen too much loneliness and too much pain, two people who'd both known loss found something unexpected. The beginning of healing, the first fragile threads of trust, and the knowledge that come morning they'd start the long walk north together, toward a cabin full of boys who needed to learn what their father already knew. That honor wasn't about being strong. It was about using your strength to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That family wasn't just blood, and that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. Thomas Mackenzie had made a promise to a dying woman, to teach their sons to be men of honor. He'd lived up to that promise every day for 2 years. Tomorrow, he'd teach them something new. About courage in the face of overwhelming odds. About standing firm when the whole world wanted you to bend. About looking at someone who didn't share your skin color or your language or your God, and seeing not a stranger, but a human being who deserved dignity and protection and respect. Tomorrow. But tonight, there was just the fire and the snow, and 2 survivors learning that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. In a mountain cabin where cruelty had reigned just hours before, kindness had taken root. Small and fragile, like the first green shoots pushing through spring snow. But growing. Always growing. And tomorrow, when they started north toward 5 boys who needed them both more than anyone yet knew, that growth would continue. Through challenges they couldn't yet imagine, through threats that would test every ounce of courage they possessed, through moments that would define not just their lives, but their very souls. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, there was peace, hard-won and precious. And in the morning, when the snow stopped falling and the winter sun broke pale and cold over the white-wrapped mountains, they would walk together into whatever came next. Two people who had every reason to give up, who chose instead to keep going, to protect, to honor the promises made to the dead by living well for the sake of those still breathing. The fire burned low, the snow piled deep, and in the heart of winter's darkest season, something warmer than any flame took hold, something that no cold could touch, something called hope. The journey north took 2 days through snow that seemed determined to bury the world. Bear walked ahead, breaking trail through drifts that sometimes reached his thighs. Behind him, Najoni followed in his footsteps, her ankle wrapped tight with strips of cloth and willow bark she'd gathered at dawn. He'd watched her that morning, moving around the cabin's perimeter despite her limp, selecting specific plants from beneath the snow with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning the land's secrets. She'd made a tea from the bark, bitter as punishment, but effective. By the time they'd covered 5 miles, she was keeping pace without complaint. That told Bear everything he needed to know about her character, tough as mountain granite and just as unyielding. They reached his cabin at sunset on the second day. The structure sat in a clearing ringed by pines, smoke rising from its stone chimney into the copper sky. To Bear, it was the most beautiful sight in the territory. Not because the cabin was grand, it wasn't, but because it meant home, it meant his boys. The door flew open before they'd crossed half the clearing. 5 shapes burst out, all young energy and winter coats, voices rising in excitement that only children could generate after days of waiting and wondering. "Papa! He's back! Did you get the elk?" They swarmed him like puppies, all grabbing for hugs and attention at once. Bear laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise Najoni, and wrapped his arms around as many sons as he could reach. But their enthusiasm died quick when they noticed the woman standing behind their father, wrapped in his spare blanket, watching them with dark, careful eyes. The boys froze. Even little Wolf, who at 6 feared nothing that walked on 2 legs or 4, went still. "Boys," Bear said, his voice gentle but firm, "this is Najoni. She's been through a hard time, and she's going to stay with us for a while. I expect you to treat her with respect and kindness. Understood?" 4 heads nodded, but little Wolf, bless his innocent heart, tilted his head and asked with the brutal honesty only small children possess, "Papa, who's the pretty lady?" Najoni's eyebrows rose slightly. Bear cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how cold it was and how long they'd been standing in the snow. "Inside, all of you. We'll talk by the fire." The cabin's interior held the comfortable chaos of a house full of boys. Clothes hung from pegs, boots lined the wall, carved wooden toys sat on shelves Bear had built with his own hands. A long table dominated the center of the room, scarred from years of meals and homework and the general business of raising children alone. Jacob, the eldest at 14, stepped forward with the careful dignity of someone trying to prove his maturity. "Ma'am," he said, offering a small bow, "would you like to sit? By the fire?" Najoni looked at this serious young man with his father's gray eyes and his mother's brown hair, and something softened in her expression. "Thank you, Jacob." His eyes widened. "How'd you know my name?" "Your father speak of his sons, all 5. He love you very much." The boys exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this. Samuel, 12 and built like a young bull, moved to help his father with their packs. Daniel, 10 years of mischief and energy, stared openly at Najoni until Caleb, quiet and 8 years old, elbowed him in the ribs. "Don't be rude," Caleb whispered. "I'm not. She just looks different from Mrs. Henderson." "That's because she's Apache, dummy." "I know that. Papa scouts with Apache, remember?" Bear let their whispers continue. Better they work through their curiosity now than bottle it up. He moved to the stove, began preparing coffee. Behind him, he heard Najoni settle into the chair Jacob had offered. heard Little Wolf edge closer with the fearless curiosity of the very young. "Does your name really mean beautiful?" the boy asked. "It does." "That's a funny name," Daniel piped up, then winced as Samuel cuffed him lightly on the head. "Your name means God is my judge," Najoni said, her tone serious but her eyes holding the faint glimmer of amusement. "That is funnier, I think." Dead silence. Then Bear's laughter rolled through the cabin like thunder, deep and genuine. The boys stared at their father, then at each other, then at Najoni. And slowly, starting with Jacob and spreading like wildfire, they began to laugh too. The tension broke like ice under spring sun. Dinner that night was simple, venison stew and hard bread, but it filled the belly and warmed the bones. The boys peppered Najoni with questions, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial shyness. She answered patiently, telling them about Apache ways, about tracking animals by the language of disturbed snow, about reading weather and the behavior of birds. Bear watched this from his seat at the table's head, coffee cup warming his hands, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Completeness. As if a piece he hadn't known was missing had suddenly slotted back into place. After the meal, Najoni noticed Caleb limping slightly when he helped clear plates. Without asking permission, she knelt beside the boy, gently examining his ankle. "Old hurt?" she asked. Caleb nodded, suddenly shy under her attention. "Fell out of a tree last month. Papa wrapped it, but it still hurts sometimes." "It heal wrong, small bone not set right." She looked up at Bear. "You have willow bark? Comfrey root?" "In the medicine box, second shelf." She moved to the shelf with surprising grace despite her own injury, selected what she needed with the confidence of true knowledge. Bear found himself watching her hands as she worked, mixing and grinding, creating a poultice that she wrapped around Caleb's ankle with strips of clean cloth. "This help," she told the boy. "Pain go away in 3 days, but you must rest. No climbing." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb whispered, eyes wide with something close to wonder. Little Wolf appeared at her elbow, holding a carved wooden horse that Sarah had made in the months before her death. The toy was his most precious possession, carried everywhere, slept with every night. "What's that?" Najoni asked gently. "My horse. Mama made it before she went to heaven." The boy's voice was matter of fact, but his fingers clutched the toy tight. "Do you know heaven? Is it nice there?" The question hung in the air. Bear tensed, unsure how to intervene, but Najoni handled it with a grace that took his breath. "I think heaven is where people who love us wait for us to finish our journey," she said softly. "Your mama watches you from there. She proud, I think. You are good boy." Little Wolf considered this seriously. Then, with the sudden generosity of children, he held out his horse. "You can hold him if you want. He makes people feel better." Najoni took the offered toy with the reverence it deserved, cradling it in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Little Wolf. He very beautiful, like his owner." The boy beamed. As darkness fell and the fire burned low, Bear sent his sons to their beds in the loft. They went with only token protests, tired from the excitement of the day. He could hear them whispering above, no doubt discussing this strange woman who'd entered their lives like a winter storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore. When their voices finally faded into sleep silence, Bear and Najoni sat together by the fire. The only sounds were the crackle of burning wood and the wind outside, howling its loneliness to the indifferent stars. "You have good sons," Najoni said finally. "They respect you, love you." "I try, but raising them alone, it's harder than any fight I ever walked into." "Your wife, she die in childbirth?" Bear nodded, staring into the flames. "Little Wolf came feet first. She bled and couldn't stop. By the time I rode for the doctor, it was too late. I came back to find her gone, and a squalling infant who didn't know his mama had died bringing him here. He does not blame himself. He's 6. He doesn't understand yet what happened, but someday he will. Someday I'll have to tell him that his mama died because he was born. That's a weight I wouldn't wish on any child. Najoni was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My husband die in battle, 2 years ago. He fights soldiers who attack our village. They dress like Apache but ride like white men, wear war paint to fool others, but I see their faces when paint smear in rain. I see them." Bear's jaw tightened. "Dalton's men." "Yes. They want us leave Sacred Canyon. Want us fight with other tribes so Army have reason to move us to reservation. Many die that day. My husband, he saved children, get them to safety, but he not make it out. I'm sorry. I too am sorry. For your wife, for my husband, for all the good people who die because bad men want more than they need." They sat in shared grief, 2 people who'd loved and lost, who understood the particular loneliness that comes from sleeping in beds too big, from making decisions alone, from being both mother and father, both warrior and comforter. "Dalton will come for you," Bear said eventually. "Those men I ran off, they'll report back. He'll send more, maybe many more." "I know. I won't let them take you." She turned to look at him, studying his face in the firelight. "Why? Why you risk your life, your son's safety, for Apache woman you not know?" Bear thought about that, about the easy answer and the true answer. He chose truth, because the last thing my Sarah said to me was, "Teach our boys to be men who protect the weak, men who stand up when standing up costs something. I can't teach that by words alone. I have to show them, by doing. Even if it mean dying, especially then. Better they remember a father who died doing right than one who lived doing wrong." Najoni nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "You are good man, Thomas Mackenzie. Like my grandfather say, the best men are the ones who fight when they not have to, because their honor make them. Your grandfather sounds wise. He is. Red Sky Walker, my mother's father. He lead our people now, keep them safe in Sacred Canyon where Dalton cannot find. The Silver Canyon. Yes, but more than silver. It where our ancestors rest, where spirits speak in wind and water. To Apache that place is holy. To men like Dalton, it is just rock and metal and money." Bear poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I testified against him once, 2 years back. Army was investigating raids on Apache villages. I tracked the raiders, saw through their disguises, stood up in that hearing and said clear as Sunday what they were. What happened? They shelved the investigation. Political pressure, they said. But Dalton knew. He knew who'd cost him his plan. Men like him don't forget. So danger already coming. I just make it come faster. Maybe. But at least this way I choose when and where. That's worth something." She smiled at that, just slightly. "You think like warrior." "I was a warrior, for a long time. Scout for the Army, before I quit. Before I saw one too many villages burned, one too many families torn apart in the name of progress. You quit because of conscience. I quit because I have sons, and I wanted them to be able to look at their father without shame." Najoni reached out then, slowly giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, her hand covered his where it rested on his knee. Her skin was warm despite the scars on her wrists, despite everything she'd endured. "Your sons look at you with love," she said softly, "and with respect. That is more precious than gold or silver or all the land in world." They sat like that for a while, hands touching, fire burning, snow falling silent outside. 2 survivors finding comfort in shared understanding. 2 warriors, battle-scarred and weary, allowing themselves one moment of peace before the storm they both knew was coming. Finally, Bear stirred. "You should sleep," Take my bed. I'll bunk with the boys in the loft." "No, I sleep here. By fire. I not take your bed." "You're hurt. You need proper rest." "I heal better knowing I not burden. Please, I prefer this way." He wanted to argue, but the pride in her eyes stopped him. She'd been prisoner for 3 weeks, helpless and bound. She needed to feel in control of something, even if it was just where she slept. He understood that, respected it. "All right, but there's extra blankets in the chest. Help yourself." "Thank you, Bear." It was the first time she'd used his name without the Thomas before it. Somehow that felt significant, like another wall coming down, another step toward whatever this thing between them was becoming. He climbed the ladder to the loft, where 5 boys slept in a tangle of blankets and dreams. Little Wolf had somehow ended up sideways across Jacob's chest. Samuel snored softly. Daniel and Caleb shared a bed, back to back for warmth. Bear settled onto the floor between them, pulled his own blanket over his shoulders, and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept turning over the problem of Dalton, of the threat that was surely coming, of how to keep his sons safe while honoring the promise he'd made to their dying mother. Below, he heard Najoni moving quietly, settling in by the fire. Heard her soft voice speaking words he didn't understand, words that sounded like prayer or blessing or both. And for the first time in 2 years, Thomas Mackenzie didn't feel quite so alone in the dark. Morning came cold and bright, the world outside transformed by fresh snow into something clean and new. But cleanliness, Bear knew, never lasted long. The world had a way of staining even the purest white with blood and mud and all the ugly necessities of survival. He just hoped that when the staining came, as he knew it would, his boys would remember the lessons, would understand why their father chose to fight when running would have been easier, would grow into men who protected the weak not because it was convenient, but because it was right. That was the legacy Sarah had asked him to leave, and by God, he'd leave it, no matter what it cost. Outside, a raven called. Inside, 5 boys woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of their father moving below. And by the fire, wrapped in borrowed blankets, an Apache woman who'd lost everything began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for. A family. Not of blood, but of choice. Not of tradition, but of honor. And in the winter of 1876, in a cabin at the edge of civilization that was more precious than all the silver buried in all the sacred canyons of the world. 3 days passed like water through fingers, each one bringing Najoni deeper into the rhythm of the Mackenzie household. She woke before dawn with Bear, helped prepare breakfast while the boys tumbled down from the loft in various stages of wakefulness. She taught Caleb which plants could stop bleeding and which could kill a man just as quick. She showed Daniel how to read tracks in snow, how to tell a running deer from a walking one by the depth and spacing of hoof prints. And she watched Bear with his sons, saw the patience in how he corrected them, the pride when they succeeded, the gentleness that lived beneath all that mountain-hardened strength. A man could lie with his words, but not with how he treated children when he thought nobody was paying attention. On the 4th morning, the sound of hoofbeats broke the winter silence. Bear was outside splitting wood when he heard them coming. 4 riders, moving slow through the deep snow, rifles across their saddles. He set down his axe, walked calmly to the cabin door, and called inside. "Jacob, Samuel, rifles, now." The boys moved fast, no questions asked. They'd grown up on the frontier, knew that sometimes survival meant acting first and understanding later. Within seconds, both stood at windows, weapons ready, while Daniel and Caleb got Little Wolf down into the root cellar like they'd practiced. Najoni appeared at Bear's elbow, her own hands steady, her face calm. "How many?" "4. Could be more I didn't see." "Dalton's men?" "We'll know soon enough." The riders stopped 50 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Smart. One of them, a lean man with shoulders like an ox, called out across the snow. "Mackenzie, we ain't looking for trouble. Just want to talk." Bear stepped out onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Behind him, Jacob's barrel poked through the window, a father and son, standing together against whatever came next. "Then talk from there," Bear called back. "I can hear fine." The lean man shifted in his saddle. "Name's Lyle Pike. That there's my brother Garrett. We got a business proposition from Mr. Dalton." "I don't do business with men who kidnap women." "Now that's just a misunderstanding. See, that Apache woman you got in there, she's wanted for questioning, official-like. Got papers and everything. Papers signed by Judge Blackwood, I'd wager, who happens to be in Dalton's pocket." Lyle Pike's jaw tightened. "Don't matter who signed them. Law's the law. Law says people can't be owned. War settled that a while back, or did you boys sleep through that lesson?" One of the other riders, younger and meaner looking, spat into the snow. "Don't get smart, Mackenzie. We got legal authority here. And I got a cabin full of witnesses who'll testify those papers ain't worth the ink they're written in. Now, unless you want to explain to a real judge why you tried to kidnap a woman from her lawful protector, I suggest you ride on." Garrett Pike leaned forward in his saddle. "Dalton's offering $500, just for her. Nobody gets hurt, you get paid, everybody goes home happy." "Nobody owns people anymore," Bear repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that meant his patience was wearing thin. "I thought we established that." "Then you're making a mistake," Lyle said. "A big one." Bear's rifle came up smooth and steady, not pointing at anyone but not exactly pointing away either. "The only mistake being made here is you boys thinking you can threaten my family on my land. Last chance. Turn around and ride away." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as a fiddle string, one wrong word away from snapping. Then Garrett Pike made his choice. His hand dropped toward his holster. The crack of Jacob's rifle split the air. The bullet hit exactly where Bear had taught him to aim, right into the snow between Garrett's horse's front hooves. The animal spooked hard, nearly throwing its rider. "Next one's higher," Jacob called from the window, his young voice steady as stone. Lyle Pike stared at the cabin, at Bear standing calm on the porch, at the rifle barrel poking from the window, at the wisdom of dying in the snow for $500. The math apparently didn't work out in his favor. "This ain't over," he said, reining his horse around. "It is for today," Bear replied. "But if you come back, bring more men. These 4 won't be enough." They rode off, 4 shapes disappearing into the white wilderness. Bear waited until they were gone from sight before lowering his rifle. His hands, he noticed, were rock steady. Good. The boys needed to see that. Jacob appeared on the porch, his rifle still ready, his face pale but determined. "Did I do right, Papa?" Bear put his hand on his son's shoulder. "You did perfect. Warned them without killing. That takes more courage than pulling a trigger ever will." Inside, Najoni stood with her back against the wall, breathing hard but controlled. When Bear entered, she met his eyes. "I should leave. Bring danger away from your sons." "No." The word came from behind her. Little Wolf stood in the cellar doorway, his small face fierce with determination. "You just got here. You can't go." "Little Wolf, you not understand. Bad men want me. They hurt your family to get me." "Then we fight them," Daniel declared, emerging with Caleb from their hiding place. "That's what Papa taught us. You protect family." Najoni looked at these boys, these children who should have been playing with toys instead of loading rifles, who should have been worried about lessons and chores instead of which direction death might come from. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I not your family. I just woman your papa help." "That's where you're wrong." Samuel stepped forward, all 12 years of him trying to stand tall. "Papa says family ain't just blood. It's the people you choose, the ones you'd fight for. We choose you." Najoni turned to Bear, silently asking if his son spoke true or just spoke young. The look on his face gave her the answer. "You leave now. They'll just chase you down," Bear said quietly. "You're weak, you're hurt, and you don't know these mountains like I do. You stay here, we fight together. We got walls, we got weapons, we got each other. That's more than you'll have out there alone." She looked around at these 5 boys, at this mountain of a man who'd risked everything for a stranger, at the cabin that had somehow become more home in 4 days than anywhere she'd been since soldiers destroyed her village. And she made her choice. "I stay, but we do this smart, not just wait for them to come." Bear's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. "I'm listening." That night, after the boys were asleep, Bear and Najoni sat by the fire planning. She drew maps in the ash on the hearthstones, showing him the sacred canyon where her people hid, explaining the paths only Apache knew, the ways a small force could defend against a larger one if they used the land's bones against their enemies. "Your grandfather," Bear said, studying her ash drawings. "Red Sky Walker. How many warriors does he have?" "Few. Maybe 10 who can fight. Rest are old men, women, children." "That's not many against what Dalton can bring." "No, but we have something he not have." "What's that?" "We know we fight for survival. He fight for greed. One makes you strong, other makes you foolish." Bear nodded, seeing the truth of it. "We need allies. People who'll stand up when it matters. You know such people?" "Maybe. There's a priest at the Mission San Carlos, Father Miguel. Good man. Believes in justice more than politics. And there's Marshal Tucker, federal man out of Santa Fe. Straight as they come, but he's 3 days away at best." 3 days long time when men come with guns. "Then we buy time, make them think twice about coming at us direct." They talked deep into the night, building plans on top of plans, preparing for possibilities they hoped wouldn't come, but knew probably would. And somewhere in the planning, their hands brushed, reaching for the same piece of kindling. Neither pulled away quick. "Your wife," Najoni said softly. "She was good woman, yes? The best I ever knew. She would want you to be happy again, to not be alone." Bear was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe, but happy seems like something that happens to other people, not men like me." "Men like you?" "Men with blood on their hands. Men who've killed and will kill again if that's what protecting my boys requires." Najoni turned to face him full on. "You think Apache women not have blood on hands? You think I never kill to protect my people? Warriors come in all shapes, Bear. Some wear uniforms, some wear doeskin, but all know the weight of doing what must be done." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not a victim who needed protecting, but a survivor who'd done her own protecting. Saw a woman who'd endured 3 weeks of captivity without breaking, who faced armed men with her chin high, who taught his sons the skills they needed to stay alive in a world that wanted to grind them down. "You're stronger than you look," he said. "Have to be. Weakness gets you killed out here." "That's not what I mean. I mean in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "Most people would have broke after what you went through. You just got harder." "Like steel and fire?" "Exactly like that." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "Then maybe we both steel. Maybe that why we meet. 2 strong things, stronger together than apart." Before Bear could respond to that, a sound from outside froze them both. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast. Bear was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "How many?" Najoni cracked the door, peered out into moonlit snow. 8, maybe 10. Too many for coincidence." "They're not wasting time." Bear moved to the ladder. "Jacob, Samuel, up and armed. Daniel, Caleb, get Little Wolf to the cellar, now!" The cabin exploded into controlled chaos. The boys moved like small soldiers, each knowing their role, each executing without panic. Within 30 seconds, the younger 3 were below, the older 2 were at windows, and Bear and Najoni stood ready. The riders stopped at the same spot as before. But this time it wasn't Lyle Pike doing the talking. A man dismounted, tall and lean and radiating the kind of confidence that came from always getting what he wanted. Even in the dark, Bear recognized him. Henry Dalton himself. "Mackenzie!" Dalton's voice carried clear across the snow. "I'm a reasonable man. Let's talk business." "Nothing to talk about," Bear called back. "The woman stays. I'm offering $1,000, cash money, more than you'll see in 5 years of trapping. Some things aren't for sale." Dalton took a step closer. "Then maybe we talk about your boys. 5 of them, if I count right. Be a shame if they ended up orphans because their daddy was too stubborn to take a good deal." Every muscle in Bear's body went tight as a drawn bow. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper but carried like thunder. "You threaten my children again, and I'll kill you where you stand. That's not a warning. That's a promise." Big words from one man facing 10. One man, 2 rifles, and a woman who knows 50 ways to kill you quiet in the dark. You want to try your luck? Come ahead. But some of you won't right away. Maybe all of you. Is she worth dying for? Dalton stood silent, calculating. Finally he laughed, cold as the winter air. "You're tougher than I gave you credit for. Fine. Keep her for now. But come spring, when the snow melts and I can bring 50 men instead of 10, we'll have this conversation again. And next time, I won't be offering money." He mounted up, his men following suit. But before riding off, he called back one more time. "Oh, and Mackenzie, I've got Judge Blackwood writing up an arrest warrant for harboring a fugitive. Sheriff will be by in a week or so to serve it. All legal like. See you in court." They rode off into the darkness, leaving only hoof prints and threats hanging in the cold air. Jacob lowered his rifle, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "Papa, what do we do? If they got a judge saying she's a fugitive?" Bear set down his own weapon, his mind already working the problem. "Then we get a better judge, or we get the law on our side for real. Father Miguel knows people, and Marshal Tucker, he's federal. Outranks any territorial judge." "But he 3 days away," Najoni said, "and Dalton say sheriff come in 1 week." "Then we've got 7 days to figure it out." Bear looked at his sons, at this woman who'd become part of their lives so quick it felt like she'd always been there. "Get some sleep, all of you. Tomorrow we ride to the mission. Father Miguel needs to know what's coming." The boys filed off to bed, reluctant but obedient. When they were gone, Najoni turned to Bear. "You should send me away. Trade me for peace. Your sons are worth more than one Apache woman." "You don't get to decide what they're worth." Bear's voice was firm. "And neither does Dalton. My boys are learning a lesson right now. About standing up when standing up costs you everything. About being men instead of cowards. That lesson's worth more than peace bought with betrayal. Even if it cost them their father? Especially then. Better they remember a man who died doing right than one who lived doing wrong." Najoni studied his face for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised them both. She stepped close, rose on her toes, and kissed his bearded cheek. Just once, soft as snow falling. "Your wife was lucky woman. Your sons are lucky boys. And I—" She paused, searching for words. "I am honored to know you, Thomas Bear Mackenzie." Before he could respond, she turned and walked to her bedroll by the fire. But her words hung in the air between them, warm as any flame. Bear touched his cheek where her lips had been, feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Not just attraction, though there was that. Not just respect, though there was that too. Something deeper, something that felt like the first thaw after a long winter. Like maybe, just maybe, the heart he'd thought frozen could beat warm again. Outside, the wind howled its ancient song. Inside, 7 people slept or tried to, each dreaming their own dreams of justice and survival and the complicated business of building family from the broken pieces of loss. Tomorrow they'd ride to the mission. Tomorrow they'd start gathering allies. Tomorrow they'd begin the real fight. But tonight there was this, the warmth of shelter, the safety of walls, The quiet knowledge that come what may, they'd face it together. And in a world that dealt mostly in cold and hunger and death, that was everything. The ride to Mission San Carlos took most of the morning, 7 people on 5 horses moving through snow that sparkled like diamonds in the winter sun. Bear led, with Little Wolf bundled in front of him, the boys' excited chatter the only sound besides hoofbeats and creaking leather. Behind them, Jacob and Samuel rode double, rifles slung across their backs. Najoni shared a mount with Daniel, who'd spent the first mile asking questions about everything from Apache hunting techniques to whether she'd ever seen a real buffalo. Caleb rode alone on the smallest horse, his healed ankles strong enough now to grip the stirrups proper. The boy had grown attached to Najoni in a way that surprised everyone, especially himself. He'd always been the quiet one, the watcher, but something about her patient teaching had drawn him out of his shell. The mission appeared through the trees like something from another world. White adobe walls, red tile roof, a bell tower reaching toward heaven. Father Miguel Santos had built it with his own hands 10 years back, with help from Apache and Mexican families who saw in him something rare. A white man who actually meant it when he talked about loving thy neighbor. The priest himself stood in the courtyard, feeding chickens from a bucket of grain. When he saw them approach, his weathered face split into a smile that crinkled the corners of eyes that had seen too much suffering but refused to look away. "Thomas Mackenzie," he called out in Spanish-accented English. "And the boys, always good to see you." His gaze shifted to Najoni, and understanding flickered across his features. And a guest. They dismounted. Bear made introductions while the boys tended the horses. Father Miguel listened with the careful attention of someone who knew that details mattered, that the difference between life and death often came down to who knew what when. "Come inside," the priest said when Bear had finished. "We should talk where walls have ears." The mission's interior held the cool stillness of sacred spaces everywhere. Candles flickered before a simple altar. Wooden benches worn smooth by countless knees lined the small nave. Father Miguel led them to a back room, part office and part living quarters, where maps covered one wall and books filled shelves carved from local pine. "Dalton," the priest said, not a question but a statement heavy with history. "I knew he'd push too far eventually." "You know him?" Najoni asked. "I know what he's done. The villages burned, the families scattered, all so he can claim land that was never his to take." Father Miguel's hands clenched. "I've written letters. To the territorial governor, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to anyone who might listen. But paper moves slow, and evil moves fast." "He's got Judge Blackwood in his pocket," Bear said. "Got him writing up warrants to make his land grab look legal." "Blackwood." Miguel spat the name like a curse. "That man wouldn't know justice if it bit him, but he knows money. And Dalton has plenty of that." "So what do we do?" Jacob asked. At 14 he was old enough to understand the stakes, old enough to know that sometimes good men had to make hard choices. If the judge says she's a fugitive, doesn't the law say she has to go? "The law," Father Miguel said carefully, "is not always the same as justice. And when law serves evil instead of good, men of conscience must choose which master they serve." He turned to Najoni. "There is an old tradition, child. Sanctuary. If you stay within these mission walls, even corrupt officials must think twice before dragging you out. The church has power that even men like Dalton respect, or fear." "For how long?" Bear asked. "As long as needed. I sent word to Marshal Tucker 2 days ago as soon as I heard Dalton was moving against you. He's a good man, a just man. If anyone can cut through Dalton's legal tricks, it's him. But the fastest rider will need 3 days there, 3 days back. Maybe more with the snow. 6 days minimum." Bear did the math in his head. "Dalton said the sheriff would come in a week. That's cutting it close. Then we make it work." Father Miguel's voice held the kind of certainty that came from faith tested by fire. "She stays here. You and the boys go back to your cabin, act normal. If the sheriff comes looking, you tell him she left. Headed south to Mexico, maybe. By the time he figures out you lied, Marshal Tucker will be here. And if Dalton doesn't wait for legal niceties? Najoni's voice was quiet but firm. If he come with men and guns? Then these walls become fortress, and this old priest remembers how to fight. Miguel pulled a rifle from behind his desk, well oiled and clearly maintained. I may serve the Prince of Peace, but I also serve his people. Sometimes peace requires strong hands. Little Wolf tugged on Najoni's sleeve. But if you stay here, who's going to teach me the Dreamcatcher song? You promised. The boy's innocent question cut through the tactical planning like a knife. Najoni knelt to his level, her dark eyes soft. I teach you now, yes? Before I stay here. I teach all of you, so you remember, even when I'm not there. What followed was a moment of grace in the midst of planning for violence. Najoni sat cross-legged in the mission courtyard, 5 boys gathered around her, while she sang an Apache blessing in her native tongue. The words rose and fell like wind through canyon walls, like water over stone, like all the old songs that had survived because they carried truth too deep for mere words. When she finished, she looked at each boy in turn. This song say that the people we love never truly leave us. They live here. She touched Little Wolf's chest. And here. She touched his forehead. Body can be far away, but heart and mind keep them close. Understand? Little Wolf nodded solemnly. Like Mama, she's in heaven, but also in here. Yes, exactly like that. Bear watched this from the doorway, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. This woman who'd been a stranger less than a week ago had somehow woven herself into the fabric of his family so completely it felt like she'd always been there. Like there was a Najoni-shaped hole in their lives that none of them had known existed until she filled it. The ride back to the cabin was quieter. The boys understood now that something was shifting, that the easy days of Najoni teaching them and cooking with them and making the cabin feel like more than just a house were pausing, maybe ending. She'll come back, right, Papa? Caleb asked as they neared home, his voice small in the vast white wilderness. I don't know, son. I hope so. But she has to. She's family now. Bear didn't answer, because he couldn't promise what he didn't control. But in his heart, he knew Caleb was right. Somewhere in the past week, Najoni had stopped being a stranger they were helping and become something more, something essential. That night, with Najoni safely at the mission and his boys asleep in the loft, Bear sat alone by the fire and let himself think about things he'd locked away since Sarah died, about loneliness that went bone deep, about waking in the dark and reaching for someone who wasn't there, about the specific ache of being a good father but a man with no partner to share the weight. He'd loved Sarah. God, how he'd loved her. But she was gone, and the living had to keep living. Was it betrayal to feel something for someone else? Or was it betrayal to her memory to spend the rest of his life alone, teaching his sons by example that loving once meant never loving again? 3 days passed, then 4. Bear kept his routine normal, taking the boys hunting, teaching them lessons, keeping everything looking like nothing had changed. But at night, lying in bed that felt too big and too empty, he counted hours until Marshal Tucker might arrive. On the 5th day, Sheriff Miller rode up to the cabin. He was a decent man, Miller, caught between what was legal and what was right, trying to navigate waters that would drown most men. He sat his horse nervous, not meeting Bear's eyes direct. Thomas, he said, got a warrant here, for the Apache woman. Judge Blackwood signed it official. She's not here. Where'd she go? South. Mexico, maybe. Didn't ask, didn't tell. Miller looked at the cabin, at the boys peeking through windows, at Bear standing solid as the mountains behind him. You understand I got to search? You understand I got to defend my home and my children from anyone I think might threaten them? They stared at each other, 2 men who didn't want this confrontation but were stuck in it anyway. Finally Miller sighed. I'll file my report saying she wasn't here. That should buy some time. But Dalton's pushing hard, talking about bringing in federal marshals of his own, ones he's paid for. Says if the law won't move fast enough, he'll handle it himself. Let him try. Thomas, he's got 40, maybe 50 men. Ranch hands, hired guns, men who'll do anything for money. You're one man with 5 boys. That's not a fight you can win. Maybe not. But it's a fight I'll have, if that's what protecting my family requires. Miller shook his head. You always were stubborn. Sarah used to say you were the most pig-headed man in 3 territories. She knew me well. She did. Miller gathered his reins. I'll delay as long as I can, but Dalton's got powerful friends. Eventually I won't be able to hold him off. Then let's hope eventually doesn't come before Tucker gets here. The sheriff rode off, leaving Bear standing in snow that was starting to melt around the edges as December gave way to January. Spring was coming, still months away, but inevitable. And with spring would come Dalton's threatened 50 men, 50 rifles, 50 reasons why standing alone was foolish. But Bear wasn't alone. He had his sons. He had Father Miguel. He had Nijoni, who'd proven in a dozen small ways that she was worth standing for. And somewhere on the road from Santa Fe, maybe Marshal Tucker was riding hard, bringing the kind of justice that couldn't be bought or threatened away. On the 6th day, Little Wolf got sick. Not deathly sick, but sick enough that his forehead burned with fever and his small body shook with chills. Bear did what he could, cold compresses and willow bark tea, but the fever climbed anyway. We need Nijoni, Caleb said, watching his little brother toss and turn. She'd know what to do. I'll ride to the mission, Jacob offered. Bring her back. No. Bear's voice was firm. She's safe where she is. Bringing her here now, with Dalton watching, that'd be walking into his trap. But Little Wolf needs her. Daniel's voice cracked with fear and frustration. Bear knelt beside his youngest son's bed, feeling helpless in a way that fighting men with guns never made him feel. Against violence he had answers. Against sickness he only had hope. I'll do what I can, but right now, keeping Nijoni safe is more important than anything. Even this. The words hurt to say, hurt more to mean, but sometimes being a father meant making choices that tore you apart inside. Little Wolf's fever broke on the 7th day, just as riders appeared on the horizon. Not Dalton's men this time. Something better. A man in a marshal's uniform riding with Father Miguel and 3 Apache warriors Bear didn't know. Marshal Wade Tucker dismounted like he'd been born on a horse. 50 years old, gray mustache, and eyes that had seen every kind of evil man could invent. Behind him the Apache warriors stayed mounted, silent and watchful. Mackenzie? Tucker's voice had the rough authority of someone who'd spent 30 years enforcing law in places where law was more suggestion than rule. Marshal, Father Miguel filled me in. Says you're harboring an Apache woman. Says she's wanted on some trumped-up warrant from a judge who takes bribes like communion wafers. That's about the size of it. Tucker looked around, at the cabin, at the 5 boys watching from windows, at the tracks in the snow that told stories to anyone who knew how to read them. Where is she? Safe. At the mission. Good. Keep her there. Tucker pulled papers from his saddlebag. I've got federal authority here. Supersedes any territorial judge. And I've got testimony from these Apache men about what Dalton's been doing. Raids disguised as tribal warfare. Murder. Theft. Enough to hang him 3 times over if I can prove it in court. Can you? Maybe. With the woman's testimony about what she saw, what was done to her, combined with what these warriors know, yeah. I think I can make it stick. One of the Apache riders spoke then, his English good but flavored with the accent of someone who thought in a different language. I am Red Sky Walker. Nijoni is my granddaughter. If you protect her, if you bring justice, Apache people will not forget. We will speak for you when others speak against. Bear looked at this elder, at the wisdom in eyes that had seen his people nearly destroyed, and felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about whether justice meant anything at all, whether the powerful could do whatever they wanted, or whether sometimes ordinary men stood up and said no more. "We'll protect her," Bear said, "whatever it takes." Red Sky Walker nodded slowly. "My granddaughter chose well. The man who would stand between her and wolves. That is a man worth knowing." "She's the one who's brave," Bear said. "I'm just stubborn." "Sometimes the same thing." Red Sky Walker smiled, just slightly. "Sometimes exactly the same thing." Tucker remounted. "I'll file my reports, get the federal court involved. But that takes time, and Dalton knows it. He'll move fast, try to resolve this his way before the law catches up. You need to be ready." "We will be." "And Mackenzie? That woman, Najoni? Miguel says she's special, says she's got your boys calling her Ma. That true?" Bear hesitated, then nodded. "They love her, and I think she loves them back." "Then maybe when this is over you ought to tell her that. Women like that, ones who choose to love children that aren't theirs, they're rarer than gold. Don't let her slip away because you were too scared to speak." The marshal rode off with Miguel and the Apache warriors, leaving Bear standing in melting snow with Tucker's words echoing in his head. Don't let her slip away because you were too scared to speak. But what if speaking meant admitting that somewhere in the past week he'd fallen for a woman he barely knew? What if it meant betraying Sarah's memory, or moving too fast, or wanting something he had no right to want? What if it meant being honest about the fact that his heart, frozen for 2 long years, had finally remembered how to beat warm? Jacob appeared at his elbow. "Papa, when Miss Najoni comes back you should tell her about how you feel." "How do you know how I feel?" "Because I got eyes. And because you look at her the same way you used to look at Mama in that old photograph, like she's the best thing you ever saw, and you can't believe she's real." Bear put his hand on his son's shoulder. "When'd you get so smart?" "Had a good teacher." Jacob grinned. "Few of them, actually. You, Mama, and now Miss Najoni. Between all 3, maybe I'll turn out all right." Inside the cabin, Little Wolf called out, fever broken and hungry as a bear cub. The crisis had passed, but Bear knew it was just the eye of the storm. The real test was still coming. Dalton would make his move soon. Had to. Every day that passed gave Tucker more time to build his case, gave the federal courts more reason to get involved. If Dalton wanted his land grab, wanted his silver, wanted to bury the truth of what he'd done, he needed to act before the law made acting impossible. That night, Bear stood on his porch and looked south toward the mission. Miles away, behind adobe walls, Najoni was safe. For now. But walls could be breached, and safety was always temporary. The question was simple. When Dalton came, and he would come, would they be ready? Would justice prevail? Or would power and money win like they always seemed to? Bear thought about Red Sky Walker's words. Sometimes brave and stubborn were the same thing. Sometimes standing up when every smart choice said to run down, that was the only thing that mattered. He'd made a promise to Sarah. To teach his sons about honor, about protecting the weak, about being men instead of cowards. That promise had led him to rescue Najoni from that cabin, had led him to let her into his home, into his family's life, into places in his heart he'd thought closed forever. And now that promise was leading him toward a confrontation that could end with him dead, his sons orphaned, and everything he'd built turned to ash. But some promises were worth dying for. Some stands had to be taken, no matter the cost, and some women were worth fighting for, even if you'd only known them a week and a half, even if loving them felt like betrayal and salvation all mixed together. Bear touched the place on his cheek where Najoni had kissed him. The warmth had long faded, but the memory remained. And memories, he was learning, could be as powerful as any weapon. Tomorrow he'd ride to the mission. Tomorrow he'd tell her what his son already knew, that somewhere between saving her life and watching her save his son's, Between teaching his boys Apache songs and learning that hearts could thaw even in the deepest winter, he'd fallen. Tomorrow. But tonight, there was just the stars and the snow and the knowledge that soon, very soon, everything would come to a head. Justice or bloodshed, law or violence, the future or the grave. Bear cleaned his rifle, sharpened his knife, and prepared for war. Because that was what was coming, sure as spring follows winter. And when it came, he'd be ready. His boys would be ready. And God willing, they'd still be standing when the smoke cleared. In the distance, a wolf howled. Not little Wolf, curled safe in his bed, but a real wolf, wild and free and singing its ancient song to the indifferent moon. Bear listened to that song and understood it. Survival, territory, protection of the pack. Not so different from what he was doing. Not so different at all. The confrontation came on a Sunday morning, appropriately enough, when decent folks were supposed to be thinking about salvation instead of violence. Bear had ridden to the mission at dawn, leaving Jacob in charge with strict instructions to keep his brothers inside no matter what they heard. He found Nijoni in the mission garden, even in January, finding herbs that survived beneath the snow. She looked up when his shadow fell across her work, and something in his face made her set down her gathering basket. "What is wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But there's things I need to say, and I'm not good at waiting once I've made up my mind to speak." She stood, brushing snow from her doe-skin dress, and waited with that patient stillness she had. The kind that made a man feel like his words mattered, like she'd listened to truth even when truth was hard to hear. "My wife Sarah," Bear began, the words coming rough like stones tumbling downhill. "I loved her. Still do, in the way you love someone who shaped who you are. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And these past weeks with you, I've remembered something I thought I'd forgotten." "What you remember? How to feel alive, how to look forward instead of just back, how to want something more than just surviving till tomorrow." He took a breath, then plunged ahead. "You've become family to my boys. They love you. And I think maybe I do too, which is foolish considering we barely know each other. But there it is. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know, in case things go bad today. Wanted you to know you mattered." Nijoni stood silent for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then she stepped close enough that he could see the silver threads in her black hair, could smell sage and smoke, and something that was just her. "In Apache way," she said quietly, "we believe people come into our lives when spirits intend it. Not by accident, by purpose. You saved my life, yes, but I think maybe I save yours too. Different way. You were frozen man, Bear Mackenzie. Good father, but frozen inside. I see that the first night. See how you love your sons, but not know how to love yourself anymore." She placed her hand over his heart, and even through his coat and shirt, he felt the warmth of it. "This heart, it beats warm again. I hear it, feel it. That is my gift to you, same as your gift to me was freedom. We even now, yes? I don't want to be even. I want to be something else, something more. Then we talk about more. But first, we survive today. Because your Marshall friend, he sent word last night. Dalton is coming, with many men, this morning." As if summoned by her words, the thunder of hoofbeats rolled across the snow-covered valley. Bear turned to see them coming, a line of riders stretching across the white landscape like a dark scar. 20 men at least, maybe more, with Henry Dalton at their head. Father Miguel emerged from the mission, his face grim but his spine straight. "Sanctuary still holds, Thomas. They cannot take her from holy ground without damning their immortal souls." "Men like Dalton don't worry much about their souls," Bear replied, his hand dropping to his rifle. "But let's remind them anyway." The riders stopped 50 yards from the mission's low wall. Dalton dismounted, flanked by Jessup and the Pike brothers, along with faces Bear didn't recognize. Hard men with harder eyes, the kind who made their living with guns and didn't ask questions about right or wrong. "Mackenzie!" Dalton's voice carried cold authority. "This has gone on long enough. That woman is wanted by territorial law. You've got no right to hide her." "She's under protection of the church," Father Miguel called back. "And federal law, represented by Marshal Tucker, who's filed papers in Santa Fe declaring her a protected witness. Your warrant means nothing." "Tucker's 3 days away. My men are here now." Dalton gestured, and his riders spread out, surrounding the mission's walls. Not attacking yet, but making the threat clear. "Send her out and nobody gets hurt. Keep hiding her, and we come in. Your choice." Bear stepped forward, rifle held casual but ready. "Here's a different choice. You ride away now, and maybe you live long enough to stand trial for what you've done. You try to take her, and some of you die here. Maybe all of you. That ground you're standing on is going to be a lot harder to explain to the law than some trumped-up warrant." "The law?" Dalton laughed, cold as December ice. "I am the law in this territory. I own the judges, I own the sheriffs, I own everything worth owning. What makes you think one mountain man and a Mexican priest can stand against that? Because they're not alone." The new voice came from the mission roof. Jacob stood there, rifle aimed steady, with Samuel beside him. Before Dalton could respond, more figures appeared, Daniel and Caleb at different corners. Little Wolf might have been too young to shoot, but he was old enough to load, and his small hands worked quick, passing ammunition to his brothers. "Your sons?" Dalton's voice held disbelief. "You'd put children in harm's way for an Indian woman?" "These aren't children," Bear said quietly. "They're men who know right from wrong. Something you forgot a long time ago." More figures appeared on the walls and roof. Not just Bear's sons, but townspeople. Mrs. Clara Henderson with her husband's old rifle. Tom Chen from the general store. The Hernandez family, all 5 of them armed. People who'd lived quiet lives until the day came when quiet wasn't enough. Red Sky Walker emerged from the mission door with his 3 warriors, bows strung and ready. "You want my granddaughter?" the old man called out. "Then you must go through her people, all of her people." Dalton looked around at the faces lined up against him, at townspeople and Apache warriors standing together, at children who should have been playing instead holding rifles. The math of violence was changing, becoming less certain, more expensive. "You're making a mistake," he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "All of you. When this is over, I'll remember every face I see here. You'll all pay." "Maybe," Bear replied. "But you'll pay first, and you'll pay harder. That's a promise." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as a rope about to snap, both sides waiting for someone to make the wrong move that would turn threat into bloodshed. Then a new sound cut through the morning air. More hoofbeats coming fast from the east. A group of riders burst through the tree line, and at their head rode Marshal Tucker with a deputy and 4 more federal lawmen. Tucker reined up between the 2 groups, his badge catching the winter sunlight. "Henry Dalton, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and theft. You and your men lay down your weapons now, or you'll be charged with assaulting a federal officer in addition to everything else." "On what authority?" Dalton demanded. Tucker pulled papers from his coat. "Federal court in Santa Fe. Signed by a judge who doesn't take bribes. Based on testimony from Apache witnesses, from Father Miguel, from 6 people who saw what you did." He raised his voice. "Any man riding with Dalton today, you're now accessories. Last chance to walk away clean." Dalton's men looked at each other, looked at their boss, looked at the rifles pointed their way, and the federal badges that made this something more than a local squabble. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Even Jessup and the Pike brothers, who'd been with Dalton longest, saw how the wind was blowing. "This is not legal," Dalton said, but his voice had lost its power. "It's as legal as it gets," Tucker replied, "and if you want to argue, we can do it in front of a real judge, in a real court, where your money doesn't talk so loud." He gestured to his deputies. "Take him." What happened next happened fast. Dalton's hand dropped to his gun, desperation making him stupid. Before he could clear leather, Jacob's rifle cracked from the roof. The shot hit the ground at Dalton's feet, close enough that dirt sprayed his boots. "Next one's higher," the boy called out, echoing the words he'd used weeks before when this all started. Dalton froze. Slowly his hand moved away from his weapon. Tucker's men surrounded him, removing his gun, clapping iron manacles around his wrists. The sound of those cuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music Bear had heard in years. "What about me?" Jessup asked, his voice breaking. "I got family. Kids." "Then you should have thought about that before you helped kidnap and torture an innocent woman," Tucker said coldly. "But you tell me everything you know. Testify against Dalton in court. Maybe the judge goes easy. Maybe." Jessup crumbled. Started talking right there, words spilling out like water from a burst dam. Names, dates, places, everything Dalton had done and everything Jessup had helped with. The other hired guns, seeing the game was up, started backing away, climbing on their horses, riding off before they could be arrested too. The Pike brothers stayed. "We didn't hurt nobody," Lyle said. "Just rode along. Didn't know what Dalton was planning." "That's for a jury to decide," Tucker replied. "But you surrender peaceful. That counts for something." Within an hour, it was over. Dalton and his closest men in chains, heading for the territorial prison to await trial. The townspeople who'd stood with Bear and Father Miguel began dispersing, heading home with stories they'd tell for years about the day they stood up to the most powerful man in the territory. Red Skywalker approached Bear, his weathered face creased with something that might have been pride. "You keep my granddaughter safe. Fight for her when others would run. That is honorable thing, Bear McKenzie. She's worth fighting for." "Yes, she is." The old man looked toward the mission where Najoni stood in the doorway watching everything. "But you must understand. She is Apache. You are white. Many people on both sides will not accept this. Will make your life hard. They can try." Red Skywalker smiled. "Good answer. Apache respect strength, but also respect wisdom. You have both, I think. That is rare in any man." He held out his hand and Bear shook it. "You marry my granddaughter, you become part of our people, our ways, our traditions, our struggles. Not easy path. Nothing worth having ever is." "True words." The old man called to his warriors, then looked back. "We return to the canyon now, but we come back in spring. For ceremony if you decide you want one. If Najoni agrees. We give blessing to new family, new beginning." After they left, after Tucker and his prisoners rode off, after the townspeople went home and the mission returned to its usual quiet, Bear found Najoni in the garden again. She was kneeling in snow, hands pressed to the frozen earth, lips moving in silent prayer. He waited until she finished before speaking. "It's done. Dalton's arrested. You're safe now." She stood, brushed off her dress, looked at him with eyes that held entire conversations. Safe from him, but not safe from fear. Not safe from loneliness. Not safe from wondering if I deserve new happiness after so much loss. Do you? Deserve it? I think maybe everyone deserves chance at happiness, but wanting and having are different things. She moved closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in her dark eyes. "You tell me this morning you have feelings. I tell you I understand. But understanding is not same as knowing if we should act on these feelings. Your sons, they love me now. But what if that changes? What if they grow to resent me for trying to replace their mother? You're not replacing Sarah. You're filling a different space, one she'd want filled." Bear took a breath, then spoke the truth that had been growing in his heart for weeks. "My boys need a mother, but more than that, I need a partner. Someone who'll stand with me, fight beside me, help carry the weight that's too heavy for one person alone. You've already proven you're that person. The question is whether you want to be." "I am an Apache woman with no children of my own. No family except grandfather. No home except what kindness provides. What do I bring to this partnership except burden? You bring healing. You bring wisdom. You bring 5 boys who go to sleep happy because you sang them songs their mother never knew. You bring me back to life after 2 years of just going through the motions." He reached out, gentle, and took her scarred hands in his. "You bring everything that matters. The only question is whether you want what I'm offering." Najoni looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers marked by ropes that had bound her, both carrying the evidence of lives lived hard. When she looked up, tears tracked down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I want very much, but I am afraid." "So am I. But my Sarah taught me something. She said fear is just love that hasn't learned to be brave yet. And I think maybe we've both been brave enough that our loves earned the right to exist." Love. She tested the word like it was something precious and fragile. "You say that word so easy now." "Because it's true. I love you, Najoni. Maybe that's foolish after such short time, but I've learned that time doesn't matter much when things are right. You're right. For me, for my boys, for the life we're trying to build, that's all I know and all I need to know." She pulled her hands free, and for a moment his heart dropped, thinking he'd pushed too hard, moved too fast. But then she reached up, cupped his bearded face in both hands, and pulled him down until their foreheads touched. "In Apache way," she whispered, "when 2 people decide to walk the same path, they speak their truth before witnesses, before family, before the spirits that guide us. I would speak my truth to you, Bear Mackenzie. I would say that you save me from death, that your sons teach me to love again, that your home becomes my home, your family becomes my family, that I will stand with you in all things, raise your boys as mine, honor your first wife by being the best second wife I can be. This is my truth. Do you accept?" "I accept." His voice was rough with emotion. "And I'd say that you saved me right back, that you taught my sons about honor and healing, that your strength made us stronger, that I will honor your people, learn your ways, protect your grandfather and your traditions like they're my own, that I will love you all the days I have left and teach our sons to love like that too. This is my truth. Do you accept?" "I accept." They kissed then, gentle and sweet, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. When they parted, Father Miguel stood in the doorway, beaming like he'd just witnessed a miracle. "I believe," the priest said, "that I have a wedding to plan, unless you'd prefer to wait?" "We've waited long enough," Bear replied, pulling Najoni close. "Life's too short and too hard to waste time when you know what you want." "Then I'll send word to your boys, and to Red Sky Walker, if you'd like Apache blessing as well as Christian." "Both," Najoni said firmly. "We bridge 2 worlds. Our ceremony should honor that." 3 weeks later, on a February morning when the snow was starting to melt and the first green shoots pushed through frozen earth, Thomas Bear Mackenzie married Najoni in a ceremony that blended 2 traditions into something new and beautiful. Father Miguel spoke of love and partnership and the sacred responsibility of family. Red Sky Walker sang songs of blessing and spoke of the courage it took to build bridges between peoples who'd been enemies. Jacob and Samuel stood up with their father, proud in their best clothes. Daniel, Caleb, and Little Wolf carried the rings, carved from silver by Red Sky Walker himself, inlaid with turquoise that caught the light like captured sky. The mission was packed with people, townspeople who'd stood with them that day, Apache families who'd made the journey from the sacred canyon. Even Marshal Tucker rode in from Santa Fe, bringing news that Dalton would stand trial in federal court, that the charges would likely see him hanged. But the trial and the justice and all the politics of it seemed distant and unimportant as Bear slipped the ring onto Najoni's finger, and she did the same for him. What mattered was this moment, this woman, these boys who were already calling her Ma like she'd always been there. this family they were choosing to build from the broken pieces of loss. When Miguel pronounced them married, Little Wolf let out a whoop that echoed off the mission walls. The other boys joined in, and soon the whole congregation was laughing and cheering. Bear kissed his new wife properly, holding her close while the world celebrated around them. At the reception afterward, Red Sky Walker pulled Bear aside. "I give you gift," the old man said, pressing a folded map into his hands. "This show path to Sacred Canyon, to our winter camp. You are family now. You are always welcome. And when times get hard, when people speak against this marriage, you remember. You have two peoples now, two families. Ooh, that makes you stronger, not weaker." "Thank you," Bear said, humbled by the trust this represented. "I'll honor this, I promise." "I know. That is why I give it." As the sun set on their wedding day, Bear and Najoni stood on the mission wall, watching the sky turn gold and crimson and purple. Behind them, 5 boys played with Apache children, languages mixing, laughter the same in any tongue. "What are you thinking?" Najoni asked, leaning into her husband's warmth. "That life is strange. 2 months ago I was alone, raising boys and hunting elk, and just trying to get through each day. Now I have you. Have hope again. Have a future that looks like something more than just survival." "Strange is good word. Apache would say spirits have plans we cannot see. We think we choose our path, but maybe path chooses us." "Maybe." Bear pulled her closer. "But I'm glad this path chose me, chose us." Little Wolf appeared at their feet, tugging on Najoni's dress. "Ma, will you teach us that star song, the one Grandfather Red Sky taught you?" "Ma." The words still made her eyes wet with grateful tears. She knelt, gathering Little Wolf close, and began to sing. An Apache song about stars that watched over travelers, about journeys that seemed impossible until you took the first step, about finding home in unexpected places. One by one the other boys joined them, then Bear, his deep voice rumbling beneath the melody. Then other voices from below, Apache and Mexican and white, all blending into something that transcended language and history and all the things that usually kept people apart. That night, in the cabin that had been too empty for too long, Bear and Najoni lay together in the darkness, listening to 5 boys breathe in the loft above. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am afraid to be happy. Afraid it will be taken away. Then we'll be afraid together. But we'll also be happy together. And brave together. And whatever comes, we'll face it like we faced Dalton, side by side." She kissed him then, soft and sure, and in that kiss was all the promise they needed, all the future they could ask for, all the love that 2 broken people had somehow made whole. Outside, winter was dying, spring was coming, and in a cabin in the mountains, a family that shouldn't have existed by any reasonable measure settled into the business of living, of loving, of proving that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Dalton would be tried and hanged by summer. The Sacred Canyon would remain protected, the Apache people left in peace. Tucker's investigation would uncover a web of corruption that reached all the way to the territorial governor, leading to reforms that would make life better for everyone. But those were future stories. Tonight, there was just this: the warmth of family, the safety of home, the knowledge that sometimes, when you stood up for what was right, even when standing seemed foolish, even when the odds were impossible, sometimes you won. And sometimes winning looked like 5 boys asleep in a loft, dreaming of tomorrow, like a woman who thought she'd never be a mother becoming one to children who loved her fierce and complete, like a man who thought his heart had died learning it could beat warm again. Sometimes winning looked exactly like this. 3 months passed like water finding its level, each day settling into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Spring came to the Sierra Blanca Mountains the way it always did, reluctant and beautiful, melting snow revealing earth that had slept through the long dark. Bear stood in the doorway of his expanded cabin, watching Najoni in the garden she'd planted where snow used to pile deep. She moved between the rows with the boys trailing behind like ducklings, each carrying tools or seed packets or questions about which plants would heal and which would harm. Little Wolf, fully recovered from his fever and more energetic than ever, dug holes with enthusiasm that exceeded accuracy. Caleb followed behind, gently correcting the spacing with the patience his new mother had taught him. Daniel and Samuel worked the far end, arguing good-naturedly about whether corn or beans should go in first. And Jacob, nearly 15 now and sprouting up like a weed, stood back watching it all with the expression of someone learning what family really meant. Not blood, not obligation, but choice. The daily decision to show up, to care, to weave your life into others until the threads became inseparable. Beautiful sight, isn't it? Bear turned to find Red Sky Walker approaching from the tree line, moving quiet despite his years. The old Apache had taken to visiting every few weeks, teaching his grandson-in-law the ways of Najoni's people, making sure the bridge they'd built between two worlds stayed strong. "It is," Bear agreed. "Never thought I'd see my boys happy like this again. After Sarah died, there was a weight on them, grief that children shouldn't have to carry. But Najoni, she didn't try to erase that grief. She just taught them how to carry it lighter. That is Apache way. We do not forget our dead. We honor them by living well." Red Sky Walker accepted the coffee Bear offered, sipped it slow. "I come with news. Good news and complicated news. That's the only kind there is anymore." The old man smiled. "Dalton was hanged yesterday, in Santa Fe. Marshal Tucker made certain the execution was public, that everyone saw what happens to men who think money makes them above justice." Bear felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but completion. Good. The boys asked about the trial every day, wanted to know if he'd pay for what he did. He paid, but that is not the complicated news. What is? The territorial governor, embarrassed by Tucker's investigation, has issued proclamation. The sacred canyon, all the land around it, is now protected. No mining, no settlement, no removal of Apache people. We can stay. Our winter camp, our summer grounds, all of it. Official and legal. Bear set down his cup, understanding the weight of this. Your people can go home. Really home. Not just hiding but living free, like you should have been all along. Yes. Which brings me to complicated part. Red Sky Walker looked toward Najoni, working in her garden, teaching Bear's sons. My granddaughter belongs to two worlds now. This one, with you and the boys, and ours with her people. She will have to choose how to walk between them. That is not easy path. She doesn't have to choose. We'll make it work. Visit the canyon in summer, come back here for winter, or whatever she needs. You would do that? Uproot your life, your boys' lives, to honor her connection to her people? Her people are my people now. That was part of the vows. I meant every word. Red Sky Walker studied Bear's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are good man, Bear Mackenzie. Rare man. Sarah chose well when she picked you, and Najoni chose well when she picked you again. That kind of choosing, it happens maybe once in lifetime. She has it twice. That is very lucky. Or very blessed, Bear thought, though he kept the words private. After the old man left, Bear walked out to the garden where Najoni was showing Little Wolf how to tell good soil from bad by its smell and texture. "Everything all right?" she asked, reading his face the way she'd learned to do. "Dalton's dead, and your grandfather brought news. The canyon is protected. Your people can stay." Her hands went still in the dirt. Protected? Truly? By territorial proclamation, legal and binding. No more hiding, no more running. Your people are free. Najoni stood slowly, dirt falling from her fingers, tears tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. my husband, my grandfather, all the warriors who fought. They rest easy now. Their sacrifice meant something. It meant everything. Bear pulled her close, not caring about the dirt, not caring that 5 boys were watching with knowing grins. Your grandfather says you'll need to visit, spend time with your people. I told him we'd make it work. We? You think I'm letting you go alone? Those boys need to know their mother's people, need to learn Apache ways, not just in stories but in living. We'll go together. All of us. She pulled back to look at him, wonder bright in her eyes. You would do this? Take your sons into Apache lands? They're not just Apache lands anymore. They're family lands. And family goes where family needs to be. Little Wolf tugged on Bear's sleeve. Does that mean we'll see Grandfather Red Sky's canyon? The one with silver? It means you'll learn to respect places that are sacred, Nijoni corrected gently. Silver is just metal. Sacred is something money cannot buy. Like family? Caleb asked. Exactly like family. That summer they made the journey, all 7 of them on horses with supplies for 2 months. The trail Red Sky Walker had marked on his map led through country so beautiful it made the heart ache, past waterfalls that sang ancient songs and meadows where elk grazed without fear. When they reached the canyon, stepping through a narrow gap in red stone walls, the boys went silent with awe. Before them spread a valley that seemed untouched by time, where Apache lodges clustered near a crystal stream and children played games that had been played for 1,000 years. Red Sky Walker came to greet them, his weathered face creasing with joy at seeing his granddaughter. Behind him, 30 Apache people emerged, curious and cautious, white men in their sacred place, even ones married to their own, that took getting used to. But Little Wolf, bless his fearless heart, broke the tension by running straight to Red Sky Walker and hugging his legs. "Grandfather, we came, just like you said." The old man laughed, deep and genuine, and lifted the boy. "So you did, little one, so you did." He looked at the assembled Apache, then at Bear and the boys. "This is my granddaughter's new family. They come in peace. They come to learn. They come to honor our ways. Will you welcome them?" The silence stretched. Then an old woman, bent with years but sharp-eyed, stepped forward. She studied Bear's face, his son's, the way he stood close to Nijoni. Finally she spoke in Apache, translated by Red Sky Walker. "She says you have honest eyes, that your sons show good teaching, that any man Nijoni chose must have strong heart." The old woman continued, and Red Sky Walker smiled. "She says you may stay, but your boys must learn to fish Apache way, and to sing the old songs, and to understand that some places are sacred not because of what's in the ground, but because of who walked there before." "We'll learn," Bear promised. "That's why we came." What followed were 2 months that changed everything. Jacob learned to track with Apache hunters, discovering skills that made his father's teaching look elementary. Samuel found he had a gift for languages, picking up Apache phrases faster than seemed possible. Daniel made friends with Apache boys his age, playing and competing and learning that children were children no matter what tongue they spoke. Caleb spent hours with the old woman, learning about plants and medicine and the quiet power of paying attention. And Little Wolf, adopted by every Apache grandmother in the canyon, soaked up songs and stories and love like dry earth soaking up rain. Bear himself learned what it meant to be part of a people who measured wealth not in gold or land, but in relationships and responsibility. He sat with the warriors, sharing stories of hunts and battles. He worked alongside the men, building and repairing and contributing to the community's survival. And slowly, carefully, he was accepted not as outsider, but as one of them. One evening, sitting around a fire while Nijoni translated stories being told by elders, Bear felt something shift inside him. For years after Sarah died, he'd felt incomplete. Like part of him had been buried with her, leaving him going through motions but never fully present. But here, in this canyon with these people, with his wife beside him and his sons learning and growing and becoming men who understood that different didn't mean lesser, he felt whole again. Not because he'd forgotten Sarah or replaced her memory, but because he'd learned that hearts could hold more than one love, more than one family, more than one way of being in the world. Late that night, after the boys were asleep in the lodge Red Sky Walker had prepared for them, Bear and Najoni walked to the edge of the stream. The water ran clear over stones worn smooth by centuries, reflecting stars that seemed close enough to touch. "Happy?" she asked. "More than I knew I could be." He pulled her close. "Your people have given us a gift. Acceptance. Belonging. A place our sons can come when the white world gets too hard. That's worth more than all of Dalton's silver. And you have given my people gift too. Hope that not all white men come to take, that some come to learn, to honor, to bridge the gap that feels too wide to cross." She paused, then placed his hand on her belly. "And soon we give them another gift." It took Bear a moment to understand. When he did, his breath caught. "You're certain?" "Very certain." Doc Hayes confirmed before we left. "I wanted to be sure before telling you." "But the fever. You said it left you barren." "I thought it did, but Doc Hayes says sometimes, when body heals from trauma, when heart heals from grief, things we thought impossible become possible. He calls it miracle. I call it blessing." Bear pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, which she was. "Sarah would have loved you," he whispered, "would have loved knowing our boys had someone like you, and she'd be happy about this baby. I know she would. I think so too. I feel her sometimes when I sing the boys to sleep, like she is there, smiling, saying thank you for loving her children when she cannot." They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something bright, feeling new life growing between them, listening to the water's eternal song. When they returned to the cabin in September, with stories to tell and skills to practice and hearts fuller than when they'd left, they found the homestead expanded. Neighbors had come together while they were gone, adding a room for the baby that would arrive with winter. Mrs. Henderson had organized it, she explained, because that's what communities did for their own. The baby came in December, exactly 1 year after Bear had rescued Najoni from that cabin. A girl, healthy and strong, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah Najoni Mackenzie, honoring both women who'd shaped their lives, bridging past and future in one small, perfect body. Little Wolf, now 7, held his baby sister with reverence usually reserved for Christmas morning. "She's so tiny," he whispered. "Was I this tiny?" "You were," Bear confirmed. "And your mother, the first one, she loved you just like this, just like Najoni loves you now. Just like we'll teach you to love this little one." "I'll protect her," Little Wolf declared with 7-year-old certainty. "Like you protected Ma from the bad men. I'll never let anyone hurt her." "I know you won't, son. None of us will." Outside, snow began to fall, the first of another winter. But inside the cabin, with 5 boys and 2 parents and 1 tiny baby girl, there was only warmth, only love, only the quiet knowledge that sometimes the hardest winters led to the most beautiful springs. Sometimes the thing you thought would break you actually made you stronger. Sometimes losing everything meant you could rebuild better, with deeper foundations and wider walls that had room for more people, more love, more possibilities. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you stood up for what was right even when it seemed impossible, even when everyone said you were foolish, even when the cost looked too high to pay, you won. Not just the fight, but something more. Something that looked like peace and felt like home and tasted like the future your children would inherit. Bear stood at the window, watching snow cover the world in white, his newborn daughter asleep in his arms, his wife resting after her labor, his 5 sons playing quietly so as not to wake their mother and sister. And he thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, and the man he'd become trying to keep it. "Teach them to be men who protect the weak," she'd said. "Men who stand up when it costs them everything." He'd done that. And in doing it, he'd found not just honor, but healing. Not just duty, but love. Not just survival, but a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a future worth believing in. The snow fell soft and silent. Inside, a family slept and dreamed. And Bear Mackenzie, mountain man and father and husband, stood watch over them all, grateful for every moment, every choice, every hard-won piece of happiness. This was what winning looked like. This was what honor meant. This was what happened when you chose love over fear, justice over convenience, doing right over doing easy. This was everything, and it was enough, more than enough. It was perfect. The end.